ordained minister in the Presbyterian Church. He's pastored churches in Florida, Staten Island, believe it or not. Hey, is Staten Island in the house?
Yeah.
I am from Staten Island originally. So now we got all the boroughs covered. And Reverend Mahoney now resides in Fredericksburg. I call it F-Burg for short. Fredericksburg, Virginia. His in-laws are in New Jersey. So he's got a lot of roots in the New York metro area. Having pastored a church on Staten Island, frequent visitor to New Jersey. But most of his activism in recent years has been in the District of Columbia, where he is on a first-name basis with virtually every policeman on the force there. No one in Washington, D.C. has been arrested more times than this man. So that's the claim to fame. Before I bring him up, though, this was a bit of a tease, I am going to ask the executive director, president of the New York School of Urban Ministries, Pastor Peter Diaruda, who graciously invited us into his home here, gave us phenomenal rates for the food and the accommodations, and donating the use of the facility for our conference, this glorious facility. The only thing he can't produce is a major parking lot across the street. I'm sorry, that is the one commodity he's not been able to come up with yet. So, Pastor, would you please give us a word of greeting before Reverend Mahoney.
Amen. Amen. To God be the glory. Amen. Amen. I said to Chris and one of the brothers from New Jersey, and that is that this is what heaven's going to be like. Amen? Heaven's going to be like. And so on behalf of my wife and I and our staff and the board of directors of NYC, we welcome you to our ministry. I met Chris about 6-8 months ago, and God, you know, when you meet Chris, it's like next to Jesus. And I didn't know Jesus, though, had a 10-gallon on his head. But anyway, there's something new every morning. But anyway, we thank God for this. I just want to share with you quickly, I should not be here today. No, I'm not talking about in the office or the building. No, on planet Earth. I wasn't planning on saying it, but I feel to say it. And that is that my grandfather, actually, I'm from Massachusetts. Anybody Boston, south of Boston? Okay. I'm incognito. I can say Red Sox, even though I'm in New York with Yankees. But anyway, my brother from Boston paid me to say that. My grandfather, who was in Massachusetts, and his father was like the Donald Trump of Boston. And this was back in the early 20s, and my grandfather was working, was married, had a lot of marital problems, and had an affair with his secretary and wanted to divorce my grandmother, only come to find out that my grandmother said, his name was Percy, and said that I'm pregnant. And he said, he demanded my grandmother get an abortion. And she says, I will not get an abortion. And they got a divorce, and of course, my grandfather and great-grandfather, they were from money, wealth, rich. I mean, my great-grandfather, he built the east and west wing of the Boston State House. Hello. So you're talking a person of influence, and divorce at any time in the newspaper was a stain. And so I should not be here, but my grandmother, by the grace of God, said no. And my mother was born, and I was born, and now you know the rest of the story. And through that experience, my mother really never had a relationship with her father until we met Jesus and put it on her heart to write a letter and found out where he was. And we had 10 years of reconciliation, and he met Jesus. So to God be the glory. What the enemy meant for evil, God will use it for good. I have a booklet here, and we'll leave these available for you. I just want to let you know that NYC, of New York School of Urban Ministry, is a training and resource center serving the urban church. We have about 5,000 people that come throughout New York, the Northeast, across the country, California, Texas, Florida, Canada, and even in Europe. They come and stay here. They learn how to do urban ministry. We send them out, street meetings, block parties, soup kitchens, FDNY, police, prisons. Now we're connecting our students also with Chris's ministry. And we have a food truck on the road where we feed over 30,000 homeless people annually by the grace of God. And pray for us because this month, you know, if you keep clapping, you're stealing my time. And Chris is not going to be my friend anymore. But pray for us because in 2 weeks, this room and our dining room will be filled with about 175 women, because we have an annual outreach we call Extreme Makeover Weekend for Women, where 175 women will come to our school from across the U.S. We will train them and send them out to minister to 800 battered women in New York City shelters, pedicures, manicures, facial, not a hand out but a hand up, summertime, basketball outreach, backpack outreach, Thanksgiving, serving 5,000 dinners to people that are all needy on the streets, and Christmas time in the shelters. So if you're a pastor, leader, volunteer, someone, I want to let you know that what we're doing right now today to host you, we can do that for your church, banquets, events, retreats, outreach. Our purpose for our ministry is to engage the body of Christ to be the church by which Jesus called us to be the church. What did John write? He said that the kingdom of heaven suffereth violent, but the violent take it by force. And that's what God is doing through your life for the next few days. He is equipping us so that we can take back what the devil has stolen. Amen? Amen. We bless you. God bless you. Thank you for being here. And we believe God today.
Bless you, Pastor. Woo! Fantastic. Is this your soda? Is this your soda? Okay. You know, this place, probably the main reason I wanted to pull this event off was this place, because I could house our speakers at a very modest cost, and the kitchen is awesome, is it not? I mean, is that an awesome kitchen? Again, we need to demolish 3 or 4 buildings across the street for a high-rise parking lot, but that's, one poor lady drove around for an hour and was whining, I went home, I'm mad at you. Pray for that lady to forgive me. I'm sorry. Parking, if you're not familiar with how to get a parking spot, there is a saint for that, St. Anthony, okay? She didn't pray to St. Anthony. So thank you, Father, Reverend Peter, and I think, you know what's an amazing tie-in is Reverend Mahoney, because all of these ministries that, the type of ministries that Pastor D. Reuter just mentioned, Reverend Mahoney's been involved in all of them. You name it. He's been involved in mostly urban ministry in his life and has awakened all kinds of aspects of the body of Christ to work for truth, justice, and civil rights. So without further ado, Reverend Patrick Mahoney.
I love coming to speak in New York in the Northeast because I'm a very passionate person.
Come on.
Right? I grew up on the Jersey Shore, the real Jersey Shore, not the MTV Snooki situation. I grew up in right above Asbury Park, if you know where that is, in West Deal. My wife in Monmouth Beach. I grew up in an Irish home of 6 children. My dad, at dinner time, would pick a topic that we would all discuss. So we would have to fight for airtime. to discuss that. And so little did I know that down the road I would be on media, so doing a show like Rachel Maddow or something else is like a walk in the park compared to rumbling with my 5 brothers and sisters. But what I love about coming up here, so I travel all over the country and around the world, and some places you go in the country are much quieter and more normal than New York. And so we had a big event during the Salt Lake Olympics. And Salt Lake is the center of the LDS community. It used to be known as Mormons, and we want to see them come into a personal relationship with Christ, but in terms of a culture, they're very nice and quiet. So I came speaking out there, and it was literally like somebody walked off of a spaceship and was speaking another language, because I came out really energetic. And like my whole team was going, you know, just kind of calm it down. And I'll never forget, I'm at a, you know I have faith. You want to know why? Because I'm a New York Giants fan. Yeah. And you got to have faith right now if you're a Giants fan. So this is when the Giants were really doing a lot of good stuff. And if any of you remember a defensive back named Jason Sehorn.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm in Salt Lake City watching the playoffs at this big pub. Well, they wouldn't call it a pub out there, but this big restaurant. And he intercepts a pass. And I'm like screaming. I'm there, Jason! 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 Yeah, and he returned for a touchdown. And I found myself, I ended up on top of a chair. Now, adult beverages were not involved. This was just me, because we were in Salt Lake. It's Sunday, so you're not going to get any alcohol. And I'm on top of the chair. And literally there's about 400 people, and they are staring at me. Like, oh dear Lord, what landed in our city? So it's nice for me to come. You don't care, I could preach on this table and you wouldn't care, right? What do you care? You're New Yorkers. You know, people just are getting in accidents and you're just walking and, you know, it's New York. So I was a pastor here, I loved it, and it was fantastic. I've known Chris for many, many years. I knew Chris when we both had hair. That's how long it was when I knew Chris.
I have hair. But receding hair. Slightly before the hat.
Brother,
I wish you sunglasses.
we just, I'm going to say something nice about you. There's nothing wrong with losing your hair. One of my closest friends and co-founder of my organization, Christian Defense Coalition, is Jay Sekulow. And Jay and I are dear friends. And Jay has great hair. I don't know if you noticed that about Jay. He's got great hair. And I remember Jay always says to me, oh, don't worry about your hair, because I compliment him on, you got the nicest hair on television. And you should give some of your hair actually to the president. You should try to work anyway. So Jay goes, oh, I think people losing their hair, men losing their hair and everything, they look really good. I said, Jay, the only people that ever say that are people that have a lot of hair. No one like me goes, oh, yeah, it's great. Anyway, seeing me go down this rabbit trail, you know now why I'm going to say I'm going to read my talk. Because I'm a storyteller, and what happens, I'll end up telling some story, and then my time will be up. And I remember I did a big international conference in Dublin. I've done a lot of work in Dublin. In Ireland, I was the first American to do the Dublin to Belfast road when they were having the Troubles. So I did a peace walk 35 years ago, helped work on the Good Friday Accord. I spoke to show you how politically fraught it is. If you're Irish in your roots, you don't call it Northern Ireland, you call it Ireland. If you speak in Londonderry, and if you speak to a Protestant crowd, it's Londonderry.
No.
If you speak to a Catholic crowd, it's Derry. And it was a beautiful witness is that many people, it was the first time they had ever heard a Protestant minister speak. And so it was wonderful to share that. So Ireland's meant a lot to me, and they've had their challenges, obviously, on the life issue. But I spoke at a conference here, and I was telling a story about a dear friend, Patty White, this funny story, and they had tons of international speakers, and all of a sudden, I'm just finishing my story, and just ready to go in my talk, and the light goes on. Like, my time's over. And I go, I didn't even get to my talk. Bye, see you later. Thank you, Reverend Mahoney. So I'm walking around.
Thank you, Reverend Mahoney.
Yeah, exactly. Chris, I love you, man. I'm going to my notes and I write down all of my talks and sermons and speeches so I don't drift. First of all, I do want to say this. Having known Chris for so long, their work with expectant mother care, over 46,000 children have been saved from the violence of the war. When Chris spoke in Idaho, that was bigger than the second largest city. That would have been the second largest city in Idaho. And Chris and I were at a Seder dinner on Capitol Hill in my old office. And I know, I'm Patrick Mahoney. I married Katie Hennessy. I'm Irish, but you're not going to hurt my feelings. I look like I own a Jewish delicatessen, don't I? I mean, so, but I am Irish. Chris and I were at a Seder dinner, and when I introduced Chris, he sort of reminds me of the Oscar Schindler of the pro-life movement. And I mean that in the most affirming, beautiful way, where all the people at the end of the film, he got the tree of righteousness in Israel. This actually is getting me a little choked up here, Chris. Think of those 46,000 children that will thank Chris when he meets them in heaven. Think they'll come up to me and say, I was a school teacher, I was a priest, I was this, and of course the women also. And so that's the beauty of what Chris's work does. Regardless of what's going on in Albany or in Washington, D.C., or in state capitals, we can be a prophetic witness for life and justice. We don't have to be swayed by what's going on around us. Okay. So now here's my talk. That was just all.
Half-hour intro.
Okay, forget about it. You clap too long for pastor, for crying out loud. Okay.
But we are awake.
That's true. Having been involved in the pro-life movement for 46 years, we're at a stage regarding abortion that I think can best be described from a line in Charles Dickens' famous novel, A Tale of Two Cities, and it's this: it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. So let me begin first with the best of times. First of all, surgical abortions are at their lowest in 46 years. Surgical abortions are at their lowest since the Roe v. Wade decision was argued. The number of abortion clinics in 1991 was over 2,000. Today, it's under 700. There's been that much of a drop. Pregnancy resource centers outnumber abortion clinics by 3 to 1. Depends on how you count it, but as many as 4,000 life-affirming or pregnancy resource centers. Support for the pro-life message, according to polls and surveys, is at its highest level ever. And those who self-identify as pro-life are at their highest levels in history. We currently have an administration that's doing more to end abortion than any other administration in history, which is Presbyterian, Reformed Presbyterian, the good Presbyterians, and having known Donald Trump and all about him for, growing up in the shadow of New York, is it Presbyterians really stress Catholics have the beauty of the sacrament and the liturgy as a part, and of course you believe in the sovereignty of God, but for Presbyterians, that's a cornerstone of what we believe. And think how amazing God is. He takes a New York billionaire playboy to be the most pro-life president in history. Is that like crazy? It's like, you know, if you would have talked to people 25 years ago in downtown Manhattan, drop, you know, some trendy eatery in Tribeca and say, you know who's going to be the person that's going to make a dent in abortion in America? Donald Trump! Are you kidding me? Of course, we would have said that about Abraham, David, Mary, and so many others. So, okay, now the worst of times. Numerous states allow abortion for the full 9 months of pregnancy and even infanticide. There's a little debate on that number, either 10, 11, maybe as high as 12. You, unfortunately, here in New York, were at the epicenter of that, and you talk about the worst of times. Be honest, could there be any worse thing that you have ever seen than that spontaneous applause when that bill was passed and they were celebrating? High-fiving. It was crushing. Planned Parenthood still gets millions, hundreds of millions of dollars every year in taxpayer funding. The Supreme Court could not affirm a Texas law which would have forced abortion clinics to have the same requirements of other clinics that have ambulatory services. Every Democrat presidential candidate, and I'm not here to argue Republican, Democrat, I'm just speaking facts, every single one supports abortion for the full 9 months of pregnancy. It's stunning. It's stunning. In my state of Virginia, I've been in Washington, D.C. 20 years, live in Virginia. Virginia was 2 votes away from moving the same legislation that New York did. Now, I love New York. I pastored here. It's beautiful. I have so many friends here. But politically, New York is a far more progressive state than Virginia. But you're thinking, we were only 2 votes away. Our governor, Governor Northam, appeared on a radio show, complete detail describing infanticide. He goes, I know exactly what would be done. And listen, brothers and sisters, we are only one national election away. We're only one away from seeing 30 years of pro-life gains overturned. One election away.
Hallelujah.
So, here. Now, most evangelical churches, this is the worst of times, do not even talk on the subject of abortion. I was talking to Claire, and I did a little study. I'm not going to name any of the churches. We build up churches. We honor the church, evangelical, Catholic, Orthodox. But we did an extensive study of the 25 largest evangelical churches. I'll speak to my community. In America, we researched their websites. Now, this was a year ago, so it could have changed. I want to put that disclaimer. But in scanning the websites of 25 of the largest evangelical churches in America, not one mentioned abortion, not one mentioned pregnancy resource centers, not one talked about sidewalk counseling in their website, and we went through the whole thing. And of course, the worst of times, still from surgical abortions, almost 1 million children die every year. Now we can rejoice that that's 600,000 less than at its height, maybe 700,000, but it's hard to consider the best of times in that light. So how do we address these best and worst of times? I always like to, as I mentioned earlier, look at history to realize that we are not the first people walking this kind of road. As Solomon said, there's nothing new under the sun. And so we face situations, and I love the Bible. We teach this premise, and it goes something like this. Situations and circumstances change, but God's principles are eternal. Amen. Right? And what I mean by that, I mentioned David. We're not seeing, giant Philistines walking down Central Park. We're not battling giants, physical giants in the public square. but we are battling giants. And the same principles that David incorporated in his defeating Goliath are the same principles we employ today in defeating giants in our culture. And of course, the greatest would be abortion. We're not going to go to a walled city like Jericho, march around once, then the final, they said to blow the trumpet, but we have walls. We have walls in our personal lives, we have walls in relationships, we have cultural walls that go along the issue of race and class and culture. And so the principles that Joshua incorporated in bringing the walls down are the same principles that we apply, even though the circumstances. Things have changed in evangelical churches. You Catholics, you got it going on in one level. First of all, I was just at a big ceremony. I'm a little jealous because it's becoming more casual in evangelical churches. I spoke at a huge evangelical church where they told me in the summer to preach in shorts. Now, I'm not condemning preaching in shorts, but that's not my thing. You know what I mean? I couldn't do that. But the Catholics have it great because you guys got the whole robes, and I was just at a high church service, and it was just, I loved it. So as Catholics, you might not totally identify with this, but where we see principle and situations, it used to be in evangelical churches you sang from songbooks, and the worship was maybe a piano and an organ. This would have been just 30 years ago. And you had a praise leader who would go, "Then sings my soul, my soul." Okay, now that's completely changed, and if you don't believe that, go to Carl Lenz's church in Manhattan, Hillsong, and you'll see how the worship has changed, and I think that's good. I remember one time, in 1981, we had a rock band, the most well-known rock band in our area, get saved, become Christians, commit their lives to Christ, and it was great. And these guys were wild. Like, they used to do an act where they would play in clubs, and an ambulance would come, and they pretended that the lead singer was a patient in a psychiatric hospital in a straitjacket. And they would have attendants wheel him in, and then he'd start, they were just crazy. They all became believers. So after several months, I felt like, okay, I'm going to have them do a worship service. Well, I almost got voted out of my church, okay? I mean, they came out, and they were just rocking and all. But now, today, that was 36 years ago. Today, that would be normal. So principles of God are eternal, even though circumstances change. And I'd like to just point out quickly, I can flesh this out in talks later, to look at Judges 6 and 7. You know, I am a Protestant minister, so I gotta put the Bible verses in here. The Judges 6 and 7, and apply the principles of how Gideon defeated the Midianites and how we can see God do extraordinary things today. Because I'm optimistic. As a Presbyterian, people say, oh, I read the book and we win. We win all through the whole Bible. God is on the move all through Scripture. We just don't win in a final chapter. God's power and glory moves from Genesis to Revelation. Sorry if I'm baptizing anybody in the front row. I do believe in Trinitarian baptism, so you're going to be okay. All right. Judges 6:6. Judges chapter 6, verse 1 through 6 says this. When the Israelites planted their crops, the Midianites, Amalekites, and other eastern peoples invaded their country. They camped out on the land and ruined the crops all the way to Gaza and did not spare a living thing for Israel, neither sheep, nor cattle, nor donkeys. They came up with their livestock and their tents like swarms of locusts. It was impossible to count them or their camels. They invaded the land to ravage it. Midian so impoverished the Israelites that they cried out to the Lord for help. So the first eternal principle is understanding the nature and depth of the struggle and battle we are in regarding life. Israel was in grave danger. They faced extinction. Their future and their future of their children and grandchildren was at risk. Brothers and sisters, there was great economic news today. 237,000 or something jobs created. Lowest unemployment in communities of color in American history, lowest unemployment in 60 years, but our country is in grave danger today. We are in grave danger because we have taken the lives of 63 million innocent children. We stand on the brink of God's judgment, and we are imploding internally under the weight of this horrific violence and wounding of women. Think about this for a moment. How can any freedom, liberty, or right that we enjoy as Americans be secure and protected if we allow innocent children now for the full term of pregnancy? It wouldn't matter to me from the first minute, but for the full term of pregnancy and even after birth to be killed, to face violence. Abortion is not just another political issue. Abortion is not something that it's put out there to dangle and keep people in line and play like a ping pong ball. It is the moral defining issue of our day and time. Yes. And doing anything else is like, in all candor, arranging deck chairs on the Titanic.
Yeah.
Right? Well, you know, it's great. We've done this. We've reduced regulations and we built 40 miles of a wall. I'm not speaking on regulations or wall. But it pales in comparison to these innocent lives.
Yeah.
It's almost like going to President Lincoln's wife and say, when we see all these, other than that, Mrs. Lincoln, how was the play? Right? So when we count these things, Gideon and Israel knew what was at stake. We have to be earnest and passionate. Dr. King said, we have to be extremists. It's just what kind of extremists will we be? Extremists for justice and human rights. We must be passionate, engaged. Now, you're not going to show that through the personality that I have, but in your greatest way in which you want to show it, they understood the first principle. It's not just a political issue. It's the defining issue of our time, and the future of our children and grandchildren is at stake. 2, Judges 6:15 through 16. Pardon me, Lord, Gideon replied, but how can I save Israel? My clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I'm from the least in my family. I love the Lord here. He doesn't even address him. I mean, it's like, God just says, I'll be with you. Right? He doesn't say, oh, I understand, Gideon, you're kind of dysfunctional, and I do all this stuff, and maybe we'll get you on Dr. Phil, and we'll see what we can do, all these. He doesn't even like kind of, it's almost rude. It's like somebody pouring their heart out to you, and you go, yeah, God's with you. It's the old Bob Newhart comedy line. That woman shares her struggles, and his response to her is, get over it! Right? I don't know if you remember, it's pretty funny, but showing my 65 years age here. But Gideon felt overwhelmed with the struggle before him. And he said, how can I save Israel? I'm from the worst tribe. I'm from the worst family. And I'm the biggest loser in my family. So this guy was an absolute loser. All right, let's be honest. He looked at his own inadequacies, his own struggles, his own weaknesses, and felt helpless. Did you feel a little bit like that after all the clapping up in Albany?
Yes.
Did you kind of feel like, oh my gosh, like, what's happening here? That's how Gideon felt. The response that God gave Gideon is the same response God gives us. I'm with you! I spoke the universe into existence. I sustain it through my presence. I am omnipotent, sovereign, Lord God. I am with you. Brothers and sisters, God is with us this morning. I don't care about Governor Cuomo. I don't care about CNN. I don't care about any of that. Many times we look at the pro-choice, quote-unquote, movement, see the money they have, the support of the establishment press, the political leaders, and like Gideon, we feel helpless. However, we need to be reminded the same God who parted the Red Sea, brought down the walls of Jericho, defeated Goliath, rose from the dead, and transformed the world with 12 people. And they wouldn't do great either. Well, they didn't start out very great, did they? You know what's awesome about the Bible, which I love? It doesn't sugarcoat our struggles and weaknesses. It doesn't put a veneer over them. Like, if you filled out a job resume, would you say, yeah, I was a pretty mediocre employee. I didn't really do my job that well. No, you'd lie. You don't lie. You know, I was quality consultant in the back sanitation department. You know, you cleaned out the trash. So you kind of embellish a little bit of what you are. The Bible doesn't do that. It records all our struggles and doubts and fears. God doesn't want us to pretend to be something that we're not. So we can feel that way, but God is with us. That's the second point. Okay, third point. In Judges 7:2 through 7, it says this. The Lord said to Gideon, listen to this, you have too many men. Chris was saying about the crowd, there's too many of you here. That's my response. Get out. Most of you just leave, go. There's too much. I cannot deliver Midian into their hands, or Israel would boast against me. My own strength has saved me. That's what Israel would say. Now announce to the army, anyone who trembles with fear may turn back and leave Mount Gilead. So if I were to say, okay, whoever's afraid can leave right now. He did that, and 22,000 men were left. 22,000 men left, 10,000 remained. So we had 32,000, 22,000 left. So Gideon took the man down to the water. The Lord said to him, separate those who will drink and lap up water as of dogs. And all the rest got on their knees to drink. And the Lord said, with these 300 men, I will save you and give the Midianites into your hands. Let all the others go. Gideon already feels like a loser. Gideon's already struggled. And God says, get rid of over 30,000 of your men. Why? Why is this important? Because God is looking for passion and commitment more than numbers. Right. We tend to look in pro-life groups, we have it completely backward. Build up our mailing list, build up our emails, build up our numbers, etc., our bank accounts, our finances. No, look for committed and passionate men and women. Margaret Mead said this, Chris is doing a wonderful leadership tactic of pulling the hook, but incrementally. So he's moved from that chair to here, and then he's going to be in front of me, and then in about 5 minutes he's going to have me in a sleeper hold. Margaret Mead said this. She said, never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has. Look at the apostles. We need passion. We have enough people here to make an impact on Albany. We do. I'm not motivated. Chris said, I wish there was more people. And of course, we always say that. I'm glad you're here because you're passionate. Samuel Adams, I love Samuel Adams. Not the beer, which is actually pretty darn good. Samuel Adams was a brewer. He was a really crappy beer maker, but he was a great patriot. And he said this, it does not take a majority to prevail, but rather an irate, tireless minority keen on setting brush fires of freedom in the minds of men. God is not interested in numbers, he's interested in passion, courage, and vision. He changed the world with 12 disciples, began the church with 120 in the upper room. I love Jack Kerouac, probably not the most spiritual guy you would think quoted, but I love this. The only people for me, this is how I'm feeling it, this is what Chris wants, this is what the pro-life movements, are the mad ones. The ones who are mad to live, mad to talk, mad to be saved, desirous of everything at the same time. the one who will never yawn or say a commonplace thing, but burn, burn, and burn like fabulous yellow Roman candles, exploding like spiders across the stars. And in the middle, you will see the bright center light pop. When God reduced it, he was identifying. It's not time for hand-holding right now in our movement. There might be people who do that. We have to be passionate. And then the final point, and here's how I counteract Chris's sleeper hold on me to get me off. You say the final point, which takes like another hour and a half, but we're throwing out the final point. Dividing the 300 men into 3 companies, actually it's my second and final point, but I'm embellishing. He placed trumpets with empty jars in their hands. You know what? I am going quick on time, so let me just say what he did. He divided the men, and he had this great idea. It was God's idea. Put torches in clay pots. So, lit torches so they couldn't see them, the Midianites. Then they were to sneak up on the Midianites with their swords, break the clay pots when they were right in the midst. They would be confused, and God would win a great victory. This is studied in West Point, in military colleges. This strategy is legendary. God birthed in them a workable, innovative, and creative strategy. And that's what he did. And brothers and sisters, that's what we need. Let me give you 2 quick ones in our movement. The first one, there are many, but was Operation Rescue. A young, skinny, used car salesman from this state, upstate Binghamton, named Randall Terry, got this idea. If abortion is murder, let's act like it. Let's peacefully pray in front of clinics. Studies show from Guttmacher Institute that 20% of women who miss their first abortion appointment go full term. So that means if 100 women miss their first abortion appointment, we've saved 20 lives. What a strategy. What a strategy. It's like Gideon's. God birthed it in Randall's heart. And God did something extraordinary. Brothers and sisters, I'm praying that God gives you and bursts into your great strategy. You know what, another one? We just saw it. Young guy, 24 years old, had no money, sleeping out on people's couches, didn't know what to do, single. His name was David DeLayden. He taped about the selling of baby body parts, and that is still going on. A brilliant, creative strategy. David didn't say, I'm from the worst family of the worst tribe. He went out and did it. Either did Randall. And Chris and I know Randall was kind of a loser on some level. No, he was great. So, and I'm going to give you another one, and then I will close with this final point. This is a negative one, but it illustrates something. It costs no money. It didn't need any people. And it has generated a national conversation. It's probably most in this room would not agree with it, but I'm only using it to show what one person with a creative strategy can do. Any guesses on what it might be? One person, no money. I'll act it out. Here's what he did. You ready? Colin Kaepernick. It's a conversation everywhere. One person. One person. Now, that's for evil, right? I mean, it's not a good, I don't want to say for evil. Forgive it. It's not for evil. I didn't mean that way. Many it might not agree with it. Personally, I celebrate everybody's right to demonstrate, even if I don't agree with it. But look at that. Okay, final, and this is the final point. I won't read all the scriptures, but Judges 7:19 through 22. They acted on it. They did it. They had courage. David DeLayden put himself at risk and now is facing time in prison and hundreds of thousands of dollars in civil sanctions. But he did it. Randall faced months and years in prison. Chris probably won't tell you, lost a lot of money, and other units for Operation Rescue. I lost $60,000 and months in prison, you have to act out your strategy. Okay? Run through the points, recognizing the urgency of the hour, realizing that God is with us, identifying the people we work with, getting a creative strategy, and then finally acting on it. So that's where we're at. Chris, I may be done. I'll be happy to answer any questions if you have any. I'm based in DC. I talk to the White House every day during the week and pray. And I'll have you know I'm banned from the White House. It's pretty funny. I'll show you the text maybe later. But any questions? If not, if my time's up, fine. But if there are any questions you might have from a national perspective, others? Yes?
Just a quickie.
Yes.
Just like to comment, when we were outside an abortion mill in White Plains, when we read in the newspaper that you guys had rescued in Philadelphia.
Yeah.
And what happened was it spread like a wildfire throughout the movement. It was a great idea. It was timely. It expressed the seriousness of the situation, and the idea caught fire across the country. It caught the imagination when you guys did that. To see that in the newspaper, and everybody who was there, who were pretty despondent at the time, it was the late 80s, were inspired by that and attracted toward your movement like I can't describe it. And half the people in this room are graduates of that movement.
Right, and I'm going to leave you with this. You have a chance for one creative strategy, and I've talked to some people. I've worked with AUL and other groups. We have this thing, abortion-free cities. There are cities that don't have an abortion clinic in them, but we want to make a statement that we're abortion-free. We have cities in Georgia and all that would do it, Alabama, but we want a city or town in New York. It could be a town of 10 people. 10 people. If you know a town, it could be 5 people on the city council. It could be a town of 50. We want to make New York, if we can, the first city that says we are an abortion-free city. So if you know of that, I'll be here throughout the day. Thank you.